Ciao, and welcome to Immersion Travel Italy, where we don't just visit Italy, we experience it. I'm Caterina Ferrara, travel author and your host. This is episode 11 in the Regional Capitals of Italy series, following Florence, Genoa, Trento, Trieste, and other regional capitals we've explored as we trace Italy from north to south. Today we're shifting off the tourist path and to the east, talking about Le Marche and its capital city of Ancona. This is an eastern region shaped by the Adriatic Sea on one side and the Apennine Mountains on the other. A place defined by ports and pilgrimage, trade and faith, resilience and continuity. And Ancona, its capital, has always been a city looking outward to the sea, to trade routes, to ideas moving across borders. To understand Ancona, you have to understand its region of Le Marche. And to understand Le Marche, you have to look beyond postcards into its layered history. Long before Rome, this land was already inhabited and contested. The region that would become Le Marche was home to Italic peoples, including the Piceni, who settled along the coast and inland hills. They traded, farmed, and understood the strategic importance of the coastline long before empires arrived. In the 4th century before Christ, the Greeks established a colony here and named it Ancon, meaning elbow, a reference to the curved promontory that shelters the harbor. The Greeks also settled in Rimini and Fermo on the east coast. This harbor would define the city for centuries to come. Rome absorbed Ancona in the 3rd century BC, recognizing its value as a naval and commercial port. Under Roman rule, Ancona flourished. Roads connected it to the interior. Trade moved across the Adriatic. Emperor Trajan expanded the port in the early 2nd century AD. And his triumphal arch still stands today, marking Ancona's importance in the Roman world. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Le Marche entered into a period of fragmentation and uncertainty. Lombards, Byzantines, and local rulers contested control. Ancona, however, retained its maritime identity and gradually emerged as a medieval maritime republic, maintaining trade ties across the Adriatic with the Balkans and Eastern Mediterranean. Unlike Venice or Genoa, Ancona's power was quieter. The city governed itself for centuries, balancing independence with diplomacy, commerce, and survival. By the Middle Ages, much of Le Marche fell under the influence of the Papal States. Unlike regions ruled by powerful dynasties, Le Marche was governed through a patchwork of papal authority, local lords, and fortified towns. This prevented the rise of a single dominant ruling family, but preserved the region's dense network of hill towns and civic identities. During the Renaissance, Le Marche did not produce like Florence or Rome, but it thrived quietly. By the late Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, the cultural heart of Le Marche has shifted inland. Cities like Urbino emerged as refined centers of learning, art, and humanism underneath enlightened rule of the Montefeltro family. From this hilltop court came not spectacle for spectacle's sake, but balance, architecture designed for harmony, scholarship rooted in the classic ideals, and a vision of governance that prized intellect over order. Urbino's court attracted philosophers, architects, and artists from across Italy, shaping Renaissance culture far beyond its walls. Meanwhile, along the coast, Ancona continued to play a different but equally vital role. While Urbino looked toward ideas of refinement, Ancona looked toward the Adriatic and the Eastern Mediterranean, and broader currents of trade and exchange. Together, these cities reveal the true character of Le Marche, pragmatic rather than theatrical, focused on stability, continuity, and connection rather than grand displays of power. Napoleon arrived at the end of the 18th century and disrupted centuries of papal control. The papal states were dissolved, borders redrawn, and authority reshaped. After Napoleon's defeat, papal rule returned, but like we talked about in the Assisi episode, it was very much weakened. In the mid-19th century, Le Marche became part of the newly unified Kingdom of Italy. Ancona's port gained new national importance, serving as a strategic military and commercial hub for the young Italian state. In the 20th century, brought profound hardship to Le Marche. World War I drained the region of men and resources, but it was World War II that left the deepest scars. Ancona became a strategic target due to its vital port lines and industrial infrastructure. Between 1943 and 1944, the city was repeatedly bombed by Allied forces, who were aiming to cripple the German supply routes as they advanced up the Italian peninsula. The port facilities, shipyards, railway yards, and surrounding neighborhoods were heavily damaged. Entire sections of the historic city were reduced to rubble, and hundreds of civilians lost their lives in the bombings. Many residents fled inland to the hills and Apennines, while others sought shelter in the caves and cellars beneath the city. Ancona was liberated by Allied troops in July of 1944, but the destruction would take decades to repair. Across the region, resistance movements operated throughout the Apennines, sabotaging supply lines and aiding the Allied advance as fighting pushed north toward the Gothic line. When the war finally ended, Le Marche emerged battered but resilient. Cities were rebuilt, ports were reopened, and the people were determined to move forward, without forgetting what had been lost. In the post-war decades, Le Marche rebuilt quietly, its economy based on agriculture, craftsmanship, industry, and maritime trade. The countryside produced wheat and grains, olive oil, vineyards yielding wines like Veridicchio, and sunflowers and legumes across the rolling hills. Small farms, olive presses, and vineyards shaped daily life, while workshops and family-run industries thrived in the towns. Ancona remained a working city, its port active, its markets practical, and its identity rooted in continuity. Today, Le Marche stands as one of the most balanced regions: mountain and sea, art and industry, and Ancona remains what it always has been, a city facing the sea. We'll talk later about industry, the industry of Fabriano and its paper production, when we talk about experiences. But I want to mention some of the other crafts that the Marche is known for. The region is known for shoemaking, centered especially around Ascoli Piceno and the surrounding valleys. Leatherworking and footwear production here grew out of rural necessity and artisan skill, eventually becoming one of Italy's most respected manufacturing traditions. Even today, Le Marche remains one of the country's most important regions for high-quality shoe production, balancing craftsmanship with modern industry. Another quiet powerhouse of Italian craftsmanship lies in a hill town few visitors know, Montepone. Remarkably, around 70% of hats made in Italy come from this area. For generations, families here have specialized in hat making, including straw, felt, and leather. What started as a seasonal agricultural effort evolved into a refined craft, exported worldwide, but still rooted in small workshops and village life. Next is Castelfidardo, the undisputed capital of accordion making. The tradition began in 1862, when a pilgrim traveling toward Loreto stopped here carrying a new type of instrument. The local craftsmen adapted it, refined it, and transformed it into industry. From Castelfidardo came accordions and organetti that would travel across Italy and the world, becoming essential to folk music, festivals, and celebrations. These industries tell us something essential about Le Marche. It's not a region defined by spectacle, but by skills, quietly passed from generation to generation. Next, we'll begin our walking tour of Ancona. But before we start our tour, you know we have to stop for breakfast in the historic center, and this time at Pasticceria Cafe Giuliani, a beloved local spot known for its pastries and classic Italian coffee culture. This is where locals and dock workers, parents stop. This is espresso at the counter and a cornetto filled with crema, my favorite. Once we've finished our coffee, we walk toward the harbor. We encounter one of Ancona's most important reminders of its Roman past. The Arch of Trajan, built in the 2nd century AD to honor Emperor Trajan's expansion of the port, the arch stands quietly near the water. It's elegant, restrained, and symbolic. This was Ancona at the height of its Roman maritime hub, connected to the empire by ships rather than roads. Beyond the arch, traces of Roman Ancona still shape the city beneath your feet. Portions of the ancient street layout survive in the urban model, following the contours of promontory rather than a rigid grid. The Romans adapted here just as the Greeks had before them. Higher up the hill, remains of a Roman amphitheater of Ancona still overlook the port. Partially excavated and long overshadowed by later construction, it once seated thousands, offering views of the spectacle and the sea. Together, those remnants tell a quiet story of continuity. Just inside the harbor sits one of Ancona's most fascinating landmarks, the Mole Vanvitelliana, also known as the Lazaretto. Built in the 18th century on an artificial island, this pentagonal structure was designed by Luigi Vanvitelli as a quarantine station for travelers and goods arriving by sea. The city was accustomed to movement: merchants, sailors, pilgrims, and ideas. And with that movement came responsibility, and the Mole was practical, restrained, and necessary to keep the city safe. Today, the Mole hosts exhibitions, concerts, and cultural events, including the Adriatico Mediterraneo Festival that we'll talk about later in the episode. At the waterfront is also the Parco del Cardetto, a wide green space overlooking the sea, And from here, paths lead toward the Faro di Ancona, the city's lighthouse. The views stretch across the port, the cliffs, and the Adriatic beyond. The walk continues upward toward the heart of Ancona, the Cathedral of San Ciriaco, dramatically positioned on the hill. The cathedral blends Romanesque and Byzantine influences, reflecting Ancona's long connection to the Eastern Mediterranean. Its facade is not ornate, allowing the location to speak for itself. From the terrace in front of the cathedral, the views stretch across the Adriatic, reinforcing why the city has always looked outward. Inside of the church, the space is calm and austere. Columns repurposed from Roman structures anchor the interior, a reminder of continuity rather than reinvention. From the cathedral, we descend back down to Ancona's historic center, passing residential streets and quiet piazzas, and we'll arrive at the Piazza del Plebiscito. In Ancona, it's known as the Piazza del Papa. This is Ancona's most atmospheric square. Long, narrow, and enclosed, framed by civic buildings rather than grand monuments. At the center stands the statue of Pope Clement XII, a reminder of the city's papal period, though the square itself feels local. In the evenings, cafes and wine bars fill with conversation. Stone steps climb upward toward the Church of San Domenico. This is where Ancona lives. Our next stop will be the Museo Archeologico Nazionale delle Marche. Just steps away, housed in Palazzo Ferretti, is the National Archaeological Museum of the Marche. This museum anchors Ancora's deep past. Inside are extraordinary artifacts from the Picenni, the people who lived here long before Rome, along with Bronze Age objects, Greek trade materials, and Roman finds from Ancona and the coast. Jewelry, weapons, and ritual objects are part of the story's region, shaped by exchange and movement. Continuing downhill slightly, we'll arrive at Santa Maria della Piazza Ancona, one of Ancona's most elegant Romanesque churches. Built atop Christian and Byzantine remains, the church embodies continuity in stone. Its facade is refined, while beneath the floor lies visible layers of earlier workmanship, new eras above old ones. A short walk to our next stop, Teatro delle Muse, Ancona's grand neoclassical theater. This is where opera, concerts, and civic life intersect. It pairs naturally with the historic cafes nearby, like Cafe Giuliani, long frequented by artists, intellectuals, and locals. From the theater, we slip into the quieter streets of Ancona's former Jewish quarter, near Via Asagno. Ancona was home to a significant Jewish community from the 10th century onward, deeply involved in trade and maritime life. The streets are narrow and medieval in character, preserving the sense of lived history. This is another layer of Ancona's identity. For lunch, we should stop at Trattoria La Moretta, a highly rated, deeply local restaurant that represents Ancona's culinary identity. This is where locals find traditional Marche cooking, seasonal ingredients, and recipes tied both to the sea and the hills. You'll find dishes like Vinci Grassi, the region's richer, more rustic answer to lasagna, or olive all'ascolana, plump fried olives stuffed with meat, and handmade pastas served in simple ragouts or with wild greens. From the coast comes preparations like brodetto, a fisherman's stew that changes from port to port, and grilled fish seasoned with little more than olive oil and lemon. Expect simple, honest food, using ingredients that reflect what grows nearby. After lunch, the walk continues toward the coast, ending at the Pasetto Monument, one of Ancona's most beloved seaside areas. Here, the city opens back up to the Adriatic. The Monument of the Fallen stands above the water, and stairways lead down toward the sea. Locals gather here to sit, walk, and watch the waves. It's a reminder that Ancona has always been defined by its relationship with the sea. Next, let's talk events. The most important festival in Ancona is its patron feast day, the Feast of San Ciriaco, celebrated in early May. San Ciriaco was one of Ancona's early bishops and martyrs. His presence is inseparable from the city itself. The cathedral, which dominates the skyline, is dedicated to him and becomes the center of this celebration. Religious services and special masses take place. When the celebration is happening, bells are ringing and families are gathering, and the rhythm of the city shifts, reminding you that Ancona is very much a place where faith and daily life intersect. I mentioned the Adriatico Mediterraneo Festival before. Held in late summer, the festival celebrates Ancona's historic role as a crossroads between Italy, the Balkans, Greece, and the wider Mediterranean world. Music, dance, and cultural events take place across the city, often near the port at venues like the Mole. Artisans from across the Mediterranean perform here, blending traditional sounds with contemporary influences. Concerts spill into open-air spaces, and the sea is never far away. Next up are our day trips, and the first one is to the town of Loreto. It's about 30 minutes on the train. Loreto is one of the most important pilgrimage towns in Italy, and it has its identity shaped entirely by faith. Its rise began in the 13th century when tradition holds that the Holy House of the Virgin Mary was transported from Nazareth to the hilltop in Le Marche. According to long-held belief, the small stone house where Mary lived, where the Annunciation took place, and where Jesus grew up was miraculously moved to safety as the Holy Land became unstable. Whether understood through faith, legend, or historical interpretation, the impact of this event was profound. By the late Middle Ages, Loreto had become one of the most important pilgrimage destinations in Europe, on par with Rome, Santiago de Compostela, and Canterbury. Popes, saints, kings, and queens, as well as ordinary pilgrims, made their way here. The town exists because of this devotion. At the heart of Loreto stands the Basilica della Santa Casa, the Basilica of the Holy House, one of the largest and most significant churches in Italy. Built between the 15th and 16th centuries, the basilica was designed not simply as a church, but as a monumental protective shell. Inside the vast Renaissance structure sits something startlingly small. At the center is the Holy House itself, a modest stone structure preserved exactly as tradition describes it. Its rough walls and intimate scale are left simple, emphasizing humility over grandeur. The house is encased in an elaborate marble screen designed by Donato Bramante, creating one of the most striking contrasts in all of Italian sacred architecture. Monumental Renaissance art surrounds an object of radical simplicity. Loreto's importance extended beyond religion. Because of the constant flow of pilgrims, the town became a crossroad of cultures, languages, and ideas. Artists, architects, and craftsmen were drawn here, contributing to the basilica and surrounding complex. The papacy heavily invested in Loreto, fortifying the town and protecting its sacred center. The Palazzo Apostolico, adjacent to the basilica, houses museums filled with tapestries, votive offerings, and sacred art donated by pilgrims over the centuries. Loreto's most important festival takes place on December 10th, known as the Feast of the Translation of the Holy House. The date commemorates the arrival of the Holy House in Loreto in 1294. The celebration is observed in Catholic communities across Italy and beyond. On the night of December 9th into December 10th, candles and lights are traditionally placed in windows, alongside roads, and in public spaces, symbolizing the journey of the Holy House. In Loreto itself, religious services, prayers, and processions take place at the basilica, drawing pilgrims even in winter. The Virgin of Loreto is also known as the patron saint of aviators, adding another layer of symbolism to the story of the house carried through the air. Even for travelers who are not religious, Loreto offers something rare: a town whose entire existence can be traced to one single powerful story, one that has shaped art, architecture, movement, and memory across Europe. The next town we're going to visit is Urbino. To get there by train, you'll take a train from Ancona to Pesaro for about an hour, and then you need to take a bus to Urbino, about 50 minutes. Urbino is one of Italy's greatest Renaissance cities and a UNESCO World Heritage Site because of its ideas. Unlike Florence, where the Renaissance unfolded through rivalry between families, guilds, and political factions, Urbino's Renaissance was guided almost entirely by the vision of a single ruler and his court. That ruler was Federico da Montefeltro. Urbino began as a Roman settlement, but its medieval identity was forged as a fortified hill town shaped by warfare and geography. By the Middle Ages, control of Urbino passed to the Montefeltro family, a dynasty of skilled military leaders who were known as condottieri, or mercenary commanders. Federico da Montefeltro came to power in the mid-15th century and transformed Urbino completely. Though a warrior by profession, Federico was a humanist by conviction. He believed that power should be expressed not through excess, but through order, learning, and culture. Federico ruled not as a tyrant, but as a patron and intellectual leader. He surrounded himself with scholars, philosophers, architects, and artists, creating what many contemporaries considered the most enlightened court in Italy. Federico deliberately cultivated Urbino as a model Renaissance state. Education, ethics, mathematics, architecture, and art were all interconnected expressions of good governance. The court of Urbino was famous throughout Europe as a place where intellect mattered as much as lineage. The physical expression of this vision is the Palazzo Ducale Urbino, one of the most refined palaces of the Renaissance. This was built not as a fortress, but as a residence designed to embody balance, harmony, and rational thought. Every proportion, courtyard, and corridor reflects Renaissance ideals of order and clarity. Even the palace's famous twin towers were designed to communicate authority without aggression. Inside, the palace housed one of the greatest libraries of its time, second only to the Vatican. Manuscripts filled with philosophy, science, and classical texts shaped the intellectual life of the court. Artists were drawn here because the court valued precision, art, and philosophy. Among the most significant figures associated with Urbino is Pietro della Francesca, whose work exemplifies clarity, geometry, and calm human presence. His paintings reflect the intellectual environment Federico fostered. Urbino is also the birthplace of Raphael, sometimes called Raphael of Urbino, whose early exposure to humanist court shaped his sense of balance, grace, and idealized beauty. After Federico's death, Urbino passed through the hands of the Della Rovere family, who continued to support the arts, but lacked Federico's singular vision. Eventually, Urbino was absorbed into the Papal States, ending its political independence. Today, Urbino is a university city, maintaining its scholarly identity. Students walk the same steep streets once traveled by Renaissance thinkers. Next, we're going to talk about experiences in Ancona, starting with boat tours. One of the most memorable experiences is getting out onto the water along the Riva del Conero. From Ancona and nearby towns like Numana and Cirolo, small boat tours take visitors along dramatic limestone cliffs and into hidden coves and sea caves that are inaccessible by land. These tours often include stops at places like the Grotta dei Frati, secluded beaches, and stretches of turquoise water that feel far removed from the working port city. Seeing the coastline from the sea helps you understand why Ancona has always been a maritime city first and foremost. Ancona is also a fishing port, and some local tour operators offer harbor experiences and guided visits that explain the port's history, fishing traditions, and role in Adriatic trade. Next, I want to talk about papermaking in Fabriano. One of the most distinctive artisan experiences in Le Marche takes place in Fabriano, about an hour from Ancona by train. Fabriano is in the valley of the Central Apennines, and it has been producing handmade paper since the 13th century and is considered one of the birthplaces of fine paper in Europe. There is a Museo della Carta, the paper museum, that offers hands-on workshops where visitors can make paper using traditional techniques, including watermarks and natural fibers. This is an exceptional experience if you want something tactile and historical. But it also connects beautifully to Italy's artistic and intellectual traditions. Painters, architects, writers, and composers all depended on paper like this. Le Marche is also one of Italy's most underrated wine regions. The Veridicchio is its flagship grape. Wineries near Jesi and the Conero area offer tastings that are relaxed, educational, and deeply connected to the land. This experience fits perfectly with slow travel and works well for visitors who don't even consider themselves to be wine experts. Olive oil production is another cornerstone of the region, and many agriturismi near Ancona, Loreto, and Raconti offer tastings and farm visits, especially in the autumn. Learn how the oil is produced, harvested, and evaluated adds depth to every meal you'll have afterward. As we wrap up this episode on Ancona and Le Marche, I hope you can hear how different this region feels from many of the Italy destinations we visited. Here, mountains meet the sea, pilgrimage towns sit alongside working ports, and Renaissance ideals coexist with daily life that has never stopped being practical and grounded. Le Marche reminds us that Italy's story isn't told in grand capitals or crowded piazzas. It's also written in smaller cities, thoughtful rulers, working landscapes, and tradition that continue without spectacle. If you'd like more detail about the sites included in this episode, there's an associated blog with additional details, walking routes, and travel notes available at caterinaferrara.com/blogs. I don't know when Le Marche travel guide will arrive, probably 2035 or something, and at that point I'll dive deeper into the festivals of the area in my writing. If you'd like ongoing travel inspiration, festival insights, and behind-the-scenes planning for upcoming episodes, be sure to sign up for my free Immersion Travel Italy newsletter. That's where I share what's coming next, seasonal ideas, and way to experience Italy far beyond the obvious. Thank you for spending time with me in Le Marche. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow the podcast, share it with someone who loves Italy, and join me next time as we continue the Regional Capitals of Italy series. Until then, travel slowly, travel deeply, and let the cities tell their stories.